Treason is not the reason for the season. Table of contents. There are 23 videos in the first sequence, with an additional 7 videos that respond to frequently asked questions. Videos 1 through 8 explain the founders' intentions around the Second Amendment and explain how the proposed Militia Selective Service Act of 20XX, MSA, would fit within that original intention. Video 1 is a summation of videos 2 through 8, so if you're only going to watch one video, make it video number 1. Videos 9 and 10 go into some details about MSA and how it would reduce gun homicides in US. Videos 11 through 15 cover some legal topics and history topics that extremists try to warp and distort and misrepresent the facts. These videos try to clear up the nonsense that extremists push. Videos 16 through 22 explain the insanity that is the 2008 Heller decision. There is a lot of insanity behind Heller, and unfortunately, it takes quite a few videos to unpack all that crazy. Video 23 attempts to give some historical perspective of how the nation went from 2 centuries of seeing the Second Amendment as only intended to protect the right to bear arms for militia service, to the more recent attempt to reinterpret the Second Amendment as mandating a complete deregulation of all guns. A description of each individual video follows. Video number 1, Summary. Overview of history, laws, and intentions of founders. If you only watch one video, watch video number 1. Video number 2, Declaration of Independence did not intend for people to declare independence every time they lost an election. Founders required government to be absolute despotism to justify revolt. Losing a democratic election is not absolute despotism. Video number 3, Articles of Confederation. No right to bear arms. But militias were for defense of state. Video number 4, Shays Rebellion. In monarchies the crime of treason and rebellion may admit of being pardoned or lightly punished, but the man who dares rebel against the laws of a republic ought to suffer death. The founders did not intend for the Second Amendment to arm and encourage treason, but rather the opposite. Video number 5, Constitution and Bill of Rights. Constitution declares rebellion to be treason. Congress has many powers to organize, arm, discipline, and govern militias. President is Commander-in-Chief of Army, Navy, and Militia. Second Amendment requires all states to allow militia members to bear arms specifically required for militia service. All other arms and rights to arms are left to the states to regulate. Video number 6, Militia Act of 1792 and the Whiskey Rebellion. Militia Act of 1792 specifies arms required for militia service to be a single musket, 18-gauge barrel, 24-shot, and a quarter-pound of powder. All other arms are left to the states to regulate. Militia Act requires all militia members to register for militia service and declares militia will be paid same as full-time army, militia will be subject to the same laws of war as full-time army, subject to court-martial, fines, and imprisonment for disobeying orders as full-time army. Whiskey Rebellion. Up to 1,000 armed rebels rose up against the first federal tax, the whiskey tax. President Washington called up a militia of 13,000 men, marched them to Pennsylvania, and crushed the rebellion. Video number 7, Overview of ratified documents, federal law, and actions of the President. Note the difference between documents ratified by the nation, versus, say, a random quote by an individual founder that disagrees with these national documents. Video number 8, Militia Selective Service Act, MSA, 20XX. An act, in the same tradition as the Militia Act of 1792, mandates that everyone with a firearm register themselves and their firearm for selective service for possible militia service. Completely within the realm of the militia powers granted to Congress in the Constitution, not nearly as severe an economic burden as the Militia Act of 1792, and completely respecting the original intentions of the Second Amendment. Video number 9, MSA attacking the iron pipeline. A side effect of MSA 20XX is that it will create a trail of breadcrumbs to the people who are illegally selling guns to criminals, with a chain of evidence strong enough to convict gun traffickers. Would make 2/3 of guns used by criminals a lot harder for criminals to acquire. Video number 10, Various random legal topics. For MISA 20XX to be effective, certain loopholes and exceptions have to be dealt with so that criminals don't find a way around the law. Video number 11, Categories of Weapons for the Militia versus Full-Time Army. No matter how many times you say shall not be infringed, you do not have the right to a nuclear hand grenade. Some weapons are bearable but terrible, too terrible to allow into the hands of an unregulated civilian militia. The Second Amendment never guaranteed a right to any and all bearable weapons. Nor did it guarantee a right to any weapon that was not an economic burden. Molotov cocktails can be made for less than $1 and are a banned weapon. Video number 12, Do you mean arbitrary? Or vague? Whenever someone suggests some specific limitation on which firearms should be legal, militia as terrorism extremists cry that such a law would be arbitrary and is therefore illegal. Vague laws are unconstitutional because they can be arbitrarily enforced by police. This video explains the difference between vague and arbitrary. Video number 13, Thomas Jefferson, lone defender of Shays Rebellion. Militia as terrorism extremists will quote Jefferson's "A little rebellion now and then is a good thing" and "The tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of tyrants and patriots" to argue that these quotes reflect the founders' true intentions with the Constitution and Second Amendment. Except these quotes are from letters from Jefferson lobbying against the Constitution, hoping the nation will not ratify the Constitution. Jefferson argued a little rebellion is a good thing. The nation as a whole said a little rebellion shall be treason and ratified it into the Constitution. Video number 14, Jefferson's "A Little Rebellion" quote versus Jefferson's response to actual rebellions. Turns out, Jefferson said a lot of things that did not line up with Jefferson's actions. Video number 15, Thomas Jefferson didn't understand the game he was cheerleading. Jefferson's support of the bloody French Revolution, which saw the reign of terror, saw hundreds of thousands of people die, saw the creation of a power vacuum which led to the rise of Emperor Bonaparte in a war that spread across the world and killed millions, would suggest that Jefferson isn't someone you should be taking military advice about rebellion from. Video number 16, The Inanity of Textualism. The Heller ruling overturned 2 centuries of precedent by judges calling themselves textualists. Textualism claims that one must interpret the law exactly and only based on the words of the law, and that one must ignore the history and context that informs the meaning and intention of that law. Even when done in good faith, textualism gives stupid results. But textualism is most often used by judges to ignore words and meaning in the law they don't like and substitute them with words and meaning they do like. Textualism is a con. Video number 17, Second Amendment is about national defense, not self-defense. Heller textualists found spectral evidence which pointed to words in the Second Amendment that protect the personal right to armed self-defense, written in invisible ink in the margins of the Bill of Rights, which can only be seen when exposed to the ultraviolet light that comes from the back end of a rabid jackalope. This video explains what an amazing level of idiocy that is. Video number 18, Natural right to self-defense is not a constitutional right to self-destruct. The Heller ruling refers to Nunn v. Georgia case of 1846, in which a state judge invoked a natural right to self-defense, and from there legislated from the bench that such a natural right requires a legal right to arms of every description that shall not be infringed in the smallest degree. This video explains that's not how natural rights work. Video number 19, Nunn v. Georgia, 1846. The Nunn ruling is invoked 5 times by the Heller ruling of 2008. The Nunn ruling was written by Joseph Henry Lumpkin, a white supremacist judge who promoted slavery, and who supported the South seceding from the Union, and who invented a right where none existed that allowed him to give unlimited arms to white slave owners to fight slave revolts, and to arm themselves against the Civil War that would start just 15 years later. Video number 20, Heller, Part 1. 2 centuries of precedent prior to Heller 2008. To fully appreciate how terrible the Heller ruling is, one must compare it to the 2 centuries of precedent that it overturned. For 2 centuries, the Second Amendment protected a right to bear arms for militia service only, all other arms and all other rights regarding arms were left to the states. Heller textualists found spectral evidence which pointed to words in the Second Amendment that protect the personal right to armed self-defense, written in invisible ink in the margins of the Bill of Rights, which can only be seen when exposed to the ultraviolet light that comes from the back end of a rabid jackalope. Video number 21, Heller, Part 2. The Founders' Design Destroyed in 2008. The Heller ruling is just the worst case of activist judges ignoring precedent, ignoring words in the law they don't like and inserting their own meaning, and hiding behind "I'm just a textualist doing what a textualist does." Video number 22, Heller, Part 3. Textualist Idiot Rule: once a thing is common, you can't regulate it. Yet another bit of idiocy from the Heller ruling. Video number 23, Tale of Two Democracies, or It's the Racism, Stupid. For the first 2 centuries of the Constitution, the Second Amendment was interpreted to protect a right to bear arms for militia service only. The idea that "shall not be infringed" was a magical phrase that overrode the part of the Second Amendment that mentioned militia service, and overrode the part of the Constitution that gave Congress the power to regulate militias and made the President the Commander-in-Chief of militias. That interpretation didn't get traction in the mainstream until sometime after the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s. And the people who are making the strongest push to interpret "shall not be infringed" as a magical deregulate all guns phrase, are racists who want to hoard unregistered guns anonymously to terrorize blacks and overthrow the federal government. The Founders did not intend for the Second Amendment to be some sort of suicide clause. The Founders did not intend for the Second Amendment to be some sort of self-destruct clause. The Founders did not intend for the Second Amendment to enable and encourage traitors to anonymously hoard unregistered weapons to overthrow the federal government. That interpretation has only been pushed into the mainstream by bigots since the 1970s or so. The next set of videos are short replies to some of the more frequently asked questions when it comes to gun regulations. FAQ number 1. What part of "shall not be infringed" do you not understand? FAQ number 2. Didn't Founders design Constitution and Second Amendment to overthrow government? FAQ number 3. When guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. FAQ number 4. Criminals already break laws, they'll just miss a gun regulation too. FAQ number 5. Chicago proves that gun regulation does not work. FAQ number 6. You can take my gun when you pry it from my cold dead hands. FAQ number 7. Gun violence in the US isn't that bad, is it? Treason is not the reason for the Second Amendment. Treason is not the reason for the season.